the other person could have, let's say, a red mark or a scratch. Hey everybody, good afternoon. This is David Kohlmeier, the problem solver. I'm here in Las Vegas at Sticky Paws Studio, and today we are basically going to have an amazing guest who is a criminal defense attorney. Every single week we have amazing people that come on the show in order to basically help people solve problems, especially if they have legal issues. But any type of problem, the problem solver is here to basically help you out. 24/7, you can basically reach myself, David Kohlmeier, a retired police officer of 17 years, helping people one problem at a time. Today, I'm here with Ryan Helmick, who is a special guest, who is the lead attorney for the Defenders Law Firm. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
So I know Ryan for quite some time as a criminal defense attorney. The guy is extremely passionate about helping people. And there's always that stigma of criminal defense attorneys of like, I think that they're bad people, but they are helping people protect their rights. And again, I always commend you for the work that you do. And again, thanks for, joining today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So what I wanted to do is, you were on the show several months ago when the Problem Solver started. I wanted to basically come up with like a little bit of a marathon of like 20 questions. We have about 60 minutes, whether it goes to 60 minutes or not a big deal. But I want to do these 20 questions because these are the questions over the last 6 years that when I would meet with people at either different law firms that I worked at or people that would just question me, like, should you do a blood test? Should you do a breath test if it's a DUI? All these important questions. So I wanted to kind of chop it up, ask these questions, and just break it down to the real simple layman term, like what should someone do? And I thought these questions would be great. So I came up with 20 questions, and I think we'll shoot through them.
I'll see if I can answer them.
So, the big thing is most people don't know when police officers stop people, there's like reasonable suspicion and probable cause. I guess let's start off with what is reasonable suspicion? What does that mean? A police officer can stop somebody. What does that mean? Well,
reasonable suspicion is the lowest standard. Everybody hears of probable cause, but there's a lower standard of reasonable suspicion. The officer must have an articulable fact, some sort of a fact based upon their training and experience that allows them to have really, not to use the same word, but reasonable suspicion based upon their training and experience that criminal activity may be afoot. Right, it's a very, very low standard. It's a bit subjective, meaning that they could have their own opinion while somebody else may feel that criminal activity is not afoot and there's nothing going on. And so that's the lowest standard that an officer can have to stop somebody.
Now, is there a certain amount of time with reasonable suspicion? Can they hold you for like 2 days or 1 day, 2 hours?
In Nevada, if you're stopped for 60 minutes is the rule in Nevada. If you are stopped for 60 minutes, they have to make an arrest or let you go.
So technically, these days, you watch these YouTube videos and people try to be educated, in general. I mean, technically, they could say the officer, I'm sorry, is there reasonable suspicion? Is my 60 minutes up? Or, is there probable cause? Am I in custody and not free to leave, right?
Right.
But I don't think people really educated. That's why I wanted to ask those questions. So reasonable suspicion means the officer has up to 60 minutes, basically, to see whether or not you're in suspicion of committing a crime.
Right, he's doing his investigation, whatever he needs to do. I mean, 16 hours long. That would be, and it's like that for a reason, because an hour he should know whether criminal activity is afoot or not, based upon such a low standard. And you're right. A lot of times people are confused as to whether or not they feel free to leave because you're stopped by a police officer. You may have been pulled over, which requires probable cause. When I'm talking about reasonable suspicion, suspicion can also apply in regards to a traffic stop too. But most people are not going to feel free to leave when they have been stopped by a police, whether walking down the street on the sidewalk, right, or whether being pulled over, certainly.
So what I mentioned to you before, as a police officer, when I was trained to do a consensual stop, right, that the front of the lights of the police car should be off. So when you go up to someone and say, hey, Ryan, my name's Dave. I'm a police officer. I just wanted to see how you doing today. That is a consensual stop. And you could say, well, is this a reasonable suspicion stop? Is this a probable cause stop, right? If you know what stop you're in, you know your rights.
Right.
Because technically it's consensual. You can say, no, officer, I'm sorry, I'm busy, and keep walking away because it's consensual.
Right. If the officer approaches you like that, then you do have the ability to say exactly what you said. No, thank you. I'm fine. Have a nice day.
It's funny because now that we talk about it, I'm thinking that with these YouTube videos, that's what they should be saying. Like, I'm sorry, officer, is this consensual stop? Is this a reasonable suspicion stop? Or is this a probable cause stop? That would be kind of the right verbiage to say, at least in this state,
Right.
But I laugh at some of the videos I see where they, the windows, going down, which we could talk about, they're not rolling all the way down. But I think that in case you really want to be educated, you got to know where you're at with the stop, right?
Exactly.
And what the officer is doing and what time of night. If it's 3 a.m, you're behind the,
and that
behind the
be
Best
enough.
Buy, like at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, and the officer stops you. Most likely, it's not going to be consensual.
And it's not going to. And to me, that's not going to be enough. If somebody's parked behind a Best Buy at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're in a parking spot, and just because it's at that time, that is not reasonable suspicion for an officer to approach a vehicle in their belief that criminal activity is afoot just because of the hour of the day, the location of the car. Now, what they would typically do is they say, well, I was just doing a welfare check, right? I'm just walking up to the car to see if everything's okay. Now, the way that you find out if that's really taking place is through the questioning of your client. What did the officer say? When he walked up to your car, did he ask you, hey, is everything okay? Anything that you need help with? Or, hey, what are you doing back here? Step out of the car. I need to talk to you, right? Or show me your papers. Now you have a situation where the stop is likely unlawful.
It's funny you say that because you're making me remind. I was on Stephanie, and it was like by Tony Romer's. And what's interesting is to share with you is that when a police officer pulls you over, he normally goes over the radio and he'll give a code of what it is. So 425A is a suspicious person. 425 is a suspicious vehicle. And 487 would be a traffic stop, meaning that there's probable cause that exists. So I think I remember they were asking me whether or not, it was a suspicious vehicle or was it a traffic stop, whether it was a violation or probable cause that the person committed a traffic, infraction, violation. But I remember they asked that question. So it's important, again, of, what the stop is, and the more educated you are about it in general, Yeah,
I think everybody needs to be educated about this. They need to know their rights, especially nowadays with the way things that are happening in regard to every different aspect of a police involvement, right? It's just good to be educated all around, so you know your rights.
So that's reasonable suspicion technically. So what is probable cause? What does that mean in layman terms now? We're taking it up a level. I mentioned consensual, we're at reasonable suspicion. Now we're at probable cause. What is probable cause to the person?
You got reasonable suspicion right here, and then you got probable cause just a little bit higher. So it's beyond suspicion now. But it's not something with absolute certainty that a crime has been committed. So you've surpassed any suspicion. If an officer said, well, I had a suspicion that he was going to rob the store because he walked past the store over and over again, 4 or 5 times, and based upon my training and experience, I thought he was casing the store and he was going to rob it. No, that's not probable cause. Probable cause requires some sort of typically illegal action. And let's talk about, for example, driving, right? Probable cause to stop somebody requires a traffic infraction of some sort. Swerving into the other lane or not putting on your blinker or not having on your headlights. Now the officer has probable cause to pull you over, right? And probable cause, he would also have reasonable suspicion. So it's an act that the officer believes there's, again, criminal activity afoot based upon his training and experience, and he has probable cause to believe that person is committing it based upon some evidence. That's the key. Some piece of evidence that criminal activity is afoot.
Instead of suspicion,
Instead of
evidence is
there has to be evidence, and it can be can be slight or marginal evidence. It can be just a little bit, above 50% of evidence. for there to be probable cause.
So I always say like 1% over 50%, like 51% probable cause is like easy for an officer to normally kind of come up with in general. So like registrations expire when they run the plate, or basically license suspenders, probable cause, right? I mean, all these things when they run plates, the biggest thing is it's coming back with a suspended, license, a suspended registration. Then basically there's probable cause for that car to be pulled over.
Right.
And when they run the person's name, there could be a local warrant and stuff like that, or there could be an old case or, a warrant for someone's arrest for, a different type of charge. So again, probable cause, again, also with higher levels, right? Like murder or, grand larceny, felonies and stuff like that, right? So basically they're going to have to have some type of evidence.
They're going to have something.
Witnesses, evidence, video surveillance, stuff like that to basically say there's probable cause to exist that this person committed a crime.
Fingerprints, something, right? The person's, like you said, eyewitness testimony. Somebody saw him leaving the scene. Somebody matched the description of the person's. Somebody matched the description of the car that was driven. There's some piece of evidence that ties the individual to the particular crime, and that's probable cause.
I'll share one. I guess we'll come up with little quick police stories while we talk about these things. But it's interesting when I didn't do this in New York as a New York City police officer, but out here we were trained to do, at least in Henderson, fingerprinting. And I used to get this stuff all over me. I used to have a box, and it was fingerprint stuff would get all over me and my body. By the time we put it all over the place. But I remember out here that I was fingerprinting inside the car of the window. Someone broke into the car, and there'd be a fingerprint, and you'd basically take off the print, and then you would find out who the person is, and you would ask the driver, the owner of the car, hey, does this person belong in the car? Is it a friend? Is it a family member? And they would say no. But the person who's basically like pulling down the window to break in, left the fingerprint, and that was probable cause to exist. Mm-hmm. Once we got back who that person was, he was arrested for auto burglaries. Mm-hmm. So the fingerprint alone that was left, it was the probable cause, and then submitted for a warrant for him. So again, it could literally be a fingerprint. It could be DNA. It could be hair. It could be right.
Even further is, and most people don't realize this, it can be somebody's word over another person's word. And take, for example, sexual assault cases. This John raped me. That's all it takes, unfortunately,
Crazy, right?
for there to be probable cause for an arrest, right? Now, to get beyond a preliminary hearing stage, there might need to be more, but again, it could still be one person's word versus another person's word. Same with domestic violence battery cases. John hit me, and the cop pulls up to the scene, and the woman is saying that John hit me. And there could be enough there for that officer to arrest John and take him to jail based upon probable cause off of what she said without any evidence at all.
That's what scares me, especially with a lot of these sexual assault cases, is that basically someone could just make up, if you know the law, right?
Right.
Just like, he touched me, he did this, and then it's your word against the other person's word, and then you have to go to court. As long as that person's really going to follow through, it's scary, right? Sexual assault, you'd be a sex offender for the rest of your life, can't get a job, employment.
Housing. It's not a strong case, right? But it's still scary for the individual that has to go through it. It would be considered a weak case if that's all they had, right, was somebody's word. It would be a very, very weak case. But nevertheless, a person is arrested, a person is charged, and now they have to spend money on hiring a lawyer. Now they've got to go through the nightmare of defending themselves in their criminal case and be the underdog throughout the process and not be able to get a job because they have something on their background for which they didn't do, right? And there's no evidence to show that they did it. And so there's all these collateral consequences that take place.
That's what scares me, I think, in society, even though I was a cop for 17 years, is just the allegations, right? And basically being that underdog and basically fighting through it in order to basically make sure that you don't have that conviction on your record. It's scary. And then I guess hiring an attorney, and then at the same point, when you hire an attorney and you fight the case, right, it costs money and time. You could lose your job. People find that you get arrested. So you have to be careful, right? The people you're hanging out with, and
that's part of it, right? There's so many different scenarios. You could be hanging out with the complete set of right people and still be wrongfully charged. It's happened. I've seen it happen. I've had many cases like that, unfortunately, and I've had cases also where they are hanging out wrong place, wrong time, and there's no evidence, but yet they're charged.
What are your thoughts these? What are your thoughts on these days? Going back one drop, with being on YouTube and basically, you see these videos where people are being pulled over, and basically on YouTube, basically saying, officer, I'm not going to roll down my window, and I know my rights and so on like that. What are your thoughts on people? I mean, I know some people out there are a little bit eccentric in regards to dealing with the police these days, or they watch videos and they want to fight back the police. Or if an officer asks them questions, how does it normally work at a traffic stop in regards to officer pulls you over? Like, what should someone really do?
Well, I mean, listen.
Because I think it antagonizes the officer, but you want to assert your rights as well.
It's definitely going to antagonize the officer. There's no doubt about it. First of all, you have to realize that you are driving on a public roadway, okay? And now you have to have certain requirements to drive on a public roadway. You got to have a driver's license. Your car's got to be registered. Your car's got to be insured. So the officer has a right to come up to your vehicle, assuming that he has reasonable suspicion to pull you over, and we're just going to assume in this example that he does, and he asks you to roll down your window, and so he can ask for your name and your driver's license and registration and insurance. And nobody can just say, no, I'm going to leave my window up and put a piece of paper on there and say, I'm not talking to you for whatever reason. That person's going to be put in a jam where the officer is ultimately going to be allowed to remove that person from the vehicle at some point or another. They're not going to be able just to not roll down their window and cooperate with at least the minor part of the investigation, right? Asking or answering rather the small questions. Now, do they have to answer where are you going, where are you coming from, or what are you doing out here? No, you don't have to answer any of those questions. You give them your name, you give them the paperwork, everything's legit, and there's no other basis for the officer's questioning. Have a nice day. You have no reason to further talk to them at all.
Got it. So the one thing I'll share with you is that I feel that when people get stopped, if you're the normal person, you get stopped by the police and you're kind of cool with the officer, you don't really know why the officer pulled you over, right? So let's just say your plates are expired because you forgot to pay your registration, right? Mm-hmm. Like Nevada Highway Patrol, I mean, I believe technically they could, if you're being somewhat in their eyes, antagonizing them and disrespectful, they could say, I'm sorry, your car base is expired and you're not allowed to drive this car on the public roadway because it's an unregistered vehicle.
Right.
Or expired. And they'll say, I'm sorry, if someone pick you up and get a cab and we're going to tow your car.
Yeah.
But if you're a normal person, they may just give you a ticket and you could fight the ticket. You go down to the defender's law firm and ticket buses and just handle the ticket, right?
Yeah, you got to pick your battles.
So you got to be careful because you don't know what's going on because the officer pulls you over. You don't know. So let's say it's speeding. And then basically you're like, I don't want to sign the ticket. Well, technically, per the law, if you don't sign it, it doesn't mean that you're guilty, right? It means they're promised to appear.
Exactly.
And if you don't want to sign it, technically, you're supposed to take them immediately to jail because they're not signing it.
And you can be arrested. You can be arrested for a speeding ticket. So you got to pick your battles and cooperate with the small stuff. And at the end of the day, I think that's going to work more in the person's favor. Right, it's the people who take it to the eccentric level of resisting the small things and not doing the small things when all they had to do was cooperate within the limits of their rights and the law, and then the officer would simply write the ticket and be on their way.
The funny thing is, even if you were carrying 1,000 pounds of methamphetamine in your car and you were cool and polite, the person may not even have a canine dog to sniff it out, right?
Yeah,
so you're more likely
not raise any red flags.
Yeah, you're more likely to leave. That's why, who knows? Whoever's running drugs could be like some old woman, driving across the United States of America with some drugs in the back, being like a typical citizen. But when you start basically asserting your rights that way, you never know. Especially if you got some stuff in your car that you're not supposed to be having anyway, right?
That reminds me of the movie.
With Clint Eastwood?
With Clint Eastwood, The Mule.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. You just seem like a typical white guy driving down the street.
Yeah.
It was an interesting one. Okay, so that was a good one. What exactly, domestic violence. I mean, I think the biggest things in Las Vegas is domestic violence and DUI.
Sure.
What exactly is domestic violence? And I guess when the police come to your home, basically you got into like a little bit of altercation with your brother or your wife, what basically should you... How should that go down if you're kind of concerned that the police are coming to your home for like a domestic violence situation?
Well, okay. So what should you do if you find if the police are coming to your house for a domestic violence situation, right?
Yeah. Like, they're coming, wife basically calls 911, says, he just spit at me. He pushed me.
Yeah.
You're there. You're sitting on the couch. You're like, get off the phone. Who are you calling? Like, I'm calling the police. You're going to go to jail.
You have a couple choices, really. I mean, because at this point, if you feel that you've done nothing wrong, you can stay there, obviously, and talk to the police. And do I recommend doing that? No, in regard to talking to the police and giving them your side of the story, because typically 99% of the time and 99% of the cases that I've had in regard to domestic violence battery, somebody's getting arrested, whether they stay and talk to them or not. And if they leave, a lot of times they get a summons for their arrest later on, or they'll get an arrest warrant later on. Once the police get involved in any type of domestic situation, 99% of the time, somebody's going to get arrested, whether there's evidence of injury or anything like that. So what should somebody do is the question, right? That's going to depend on the facts of the case. Some people might feel the need to just walk away, right, and just get out of the house and get away from the individual that they were in an argument with, and then they can call a lawyer right then and there and talk to a lawyer about, hey, this is what's going on. She's called the police, and what do I do at this particular point in time? And then I would advise them at that time, based upon the particular facts of that scenario that person's involved in, as to what they should do. Would I always advise them to leave the scene? No. I mean, sometimes it's okay to stay, but it's really a fact-specific answer to that question. But nevertheless, I think you want to not talk to the police, not give them your side of the story, and try to get a hold of an attorney as quickly as you can.
I've always said to people that, maybe it's just if you get in a fight with someone, whether it's verbal or physical, that kind of a cool down period, maybe to go to your friend's house or your family's house and just get out of the situation, because things can get worse. I think actually last week in Henderson, there was, a shooting that took place. Someone was on alcohol, domestic violence, and someone got severely hurt. So the bottom is, I think that when you're in a situation where things are getting, escalated, I think you should walk away, whoever the person may be, whether even if you're the victim, maybe leave to go to your neighbor's house, right? So things don't escalate, so you don't get hurt or arrested, who knows, whatever the situation may be.
I've had friends ask me that question before too, many, many times, right? And I think the answer is, like you said, the majority of the time, my answer has been, you got to walk away, you got to cool off, you got to get out of this scenario. Sometimes the officers will call them on their cell phone and say, hey, I want to talk with you about what happened. So it's not as if they're fleeing from the scene because they're running from some guilty act, right? That's not what that means. Them walking away could be the right thing to do.
But to de-escalate the situation.
To de-escalate is the word. Yeah, to de-escalate the situation.
Okay, so basically, let's talk about another question I have is, what should you do if you've been drinking and you've been stopped by the police? So you're in your car, you've been drinking a little bit. I only had one drink. I don't think I'm intoxicated. And you get stopped by the police. They'll say, registration, license, insurance. And most officers, probably at nighttime, they may look at your eyes, and most eyes look watery and red a little bit. So have you been drinking tonight?
Right.
What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so let's run through a DUI example, right? And we'll go with your DUI example of somebody having one drink, which is not unlawful to get behind the wheel of the vehicle after having a drink. It's only unlawful if you are intoxicated, too impaired to operate a motor vehicle safely, right? That's the law. That's the key here. And so you should not, number one, ever admit to drinking to an officer. You shouldn't answer any questions, really, in regard to helping their investigation whatsoever. Now, are they going to be upset that you're not giving them what they want? Of course. And this kind of goes back to the other question that you had asked me about, rolling down the window or not. Now, you got to roll down the window. They ask you for your driver's license. They ask you your name. They ask you for your papers. You give them to them. If they say, well, I want you to step out of the vehicle for a DUI investigation, You step out of the vehicle. If they ask you any questions where you feel now you're being investigated for a crime, now you shut up. Okay, you don't answer any questions about whether you had been drinking or not. They're going to ask you, do you want to participate in some field sobriety tests? Or sometimes they don't ask you at all. Hey, I need you or I want you to do these tests. And you respectfully would say, no, thank you, sir. I'd rather not participate in these tests. So you want to be respectful as best you can, but you have the ability to decline every aspect of their investigation. And in fact, if you truthfully did only have 1 or 2 drinks, if it was me in that scenario, I would say, officer, I'm not impaired. And if you'd like me to show you that, please allow me to blow into your portable breath test. I don't want to do the field sobriety test because they are set up for failure, even sober people. When they teach these classes, when they teach these tests at the academy, people who are not impaired fail the test. And you know that as being a former police officer and going through this stuff. These tests are difficult for people to take because they're not something that people do. People don't walk heel to toe in a straight line every day. People don't hold their leg up, right? Some people have injuries, things like that. So
you'd be like an acrobat.
Yeah, so really, you would, in that scenario, 1 or 2 drinks, you would say, I'll be happy to blow into your portable breath test to show you, to prove at that point your innocence, and hope that the cop then says, okay, my bad, I'm sorry, and let you leave the situation.
What scares me, though, is that when you say that you're drinking alcohol, technically now you're leading the officer into probable cause.
Well, I don't think you even have to say that you were drinking. If the officer is saying, well, I believe that you have been drinking. Well, if you believe that I have been drinking and you believe that I'm impaired, then please allow me to blow into your portable breath test, and I'll show you that I'm not impaired. And so that's what I would say. Now, in other scenarios where you might feel that, wait a second, I don't want to blow into any portable breath tests because maybe I had 2.5 drinks, or I don't know where I'm at, right? I can't keep track of, maybe I had 3 over the course of 3 hours. So you just decline to do everything. You decline to answer any questions about drinking. You decline to answer any questions about the investigation, about where you're going, where you're coming from, who are you with, what'd you eat for dinner?
Where you coming from?
Yeah, all those things. Can you do some tests? No, sir. I'm not going to do some tests. Can you blow into the portable breath test? No, sir. Are you going to get arrested? Yeah, most likely you're going to get arrested, unfortunately. But guess what? Either way, you're likely going to get arrested. And so you make the case very, very weak if you decline to do all those things. And those are your rights, though. You're not doing anything to circumvent the law. Those are your rights. You don't have to cooperate. You don't have to do those tests. Now, don't be an asshole, but do it in a respectful way.
So basically, by refusing to take any of these exams or answer the questions, you most likely, let's just say, if you smell of alcohol, unknown odor of alcohol, which they'll use for a training experience, your eyes look a little watery because they can see your eyes are redness.
Right.
They'll use it as probable cause to basically take you to jail. And then from there, basically, they're not going to have enough. Well, it makes their case weaker, right? Because the officers don't have the acrobatics walk and turn, the one leg stand. Right. They don't have the breath. They don't have all these things. So it makes the test, it makes them have less evidence, but then they'll probably have a blood or breath test at the jail. So all they're really going to have is the training experience of the officer, maybe eyes watery and smell of an unknown alcohol, and then blood or breath test instead of all the other things, right?
And let's hop on that for a second. When you get to the jail, now they're going to ask you, or they should at least ask you, whether you want to take a breath or a blood test. You also have the option to decline to do either one of those. Now, if you do that, though, they will suspend your license, your privilege to drive, rather, for a year in the state of Nevada. Now, you do have the ability to contest that through what's called a Dmv hearing. You have there's due process there in regard to
contesting
the ability of the DMV to take away your driving privilege. But you've got to pick your poison. And sometimes if you refuse to take the breath or the blood test, then you could put yourself outside the 2 hours. So the rule is they have to take your breath or blood within 2 hours of the time of the stop or the time that you were in actual physical control of the vehicle. Okay? And so if they don't take your breath or blood within the 2 hours, and by you saying that you refuse to take a blood or breath test, now you have required them to get a search warrant, which causes them to call a judge, which they can do by phone, but you have delayed the investigation, and sometimes it puts it outside the 2 hours, and sometimes that allows your blood or breath test to not come into the trial, which puts you in a good position to get a better result for your case.
So basically, they don't take the blood for like 2 hours and 5 minutes. 5 minutes over the 2 hours from the physical control. Does that automatically, the blood evidence basically is not admissible?
Can't come in. 1 minute over.
1 minute over.
1 minute over, yeah.
And is it from, that's a good question, is it from the car stop or is it from the arrest time?
From the time that the officer sees you behind the wheel of the vehicle, that's when the clock starts.
I always find that, I'm not an expert, and it's been a while, I've been retired for the last 6 years, but I always laugh because sometimes I say to myself that, because sometimes you don't see someone behind the car, but there's a witness that says they saw them, right?
Right.
And then sometimes it's the 2 hours exactly from, once you start conducting an investigation, the time goes a little bit quicker for an officer because by the time you get there, maybe you get there 30 minutes later by the time so the 2 hour window is something that's really important, right, to look at, right, and maybe it's something to contest, right, like were they in the car, what time did the witness see the person,
right.
Did the officer stop them, and that 2 hour window is important, right, in regards to, look, we're not trying to basically make it like everyone could drive drunk, in general, and
of course,
in general, but technically, I always say it's surviving the justice system. It's about your survival, right, like even if we all make mistakes in life, so the bottom line is if you have a DUI, it's going to hurt you for employment, for housing, for getting a job in the future, right?
Right.
So we don't want people to do it again in the future, but you still want to survive this, being arrested. So not that we are basically pro people driving around intoxicated.
Not at all. I mean, listen, the rule's there for a reason. The legislature put the rule there for a reason because alcohol in your system fluctuates. It's either escalating or it's de-escalating. And so the rule is there to actually help prevent people from being convicted of a DUI when in fact they were not impaired. At the time they were behind the wheel of the vehicle or in actual physical control of the vehicle, they may not have been impaired. And so that's why the 2 hour rule is so important.
The question is before, but I'm just going to bring it up one more time to be clear. So if I get stopped by the police, why should I do the voluntary breath test, on the street? Because is it admissible in court or not admissible, the breath test on the street, the portable device?
The portable breath test is not admissible in court. The results of a portable breath test are not admissible.
But they're using it to decide whether or not you should drive the car home or not, or if it helps them to make probable cause that they were driving.
It's all probable cause.
Right? So it's basically the breath test on the street. It's not admissible in court, but basically they're using it to get probable cause to arrest you. And you could refuse that. But you could lose your license for a year if you refuse it.
No. Not the portable breath test. You don't lose your license. You can refuse that. I'm talking about when you go to the jail, the actual evidentiary test, the big square breath machine. That's the one I'm talking about, not the portable one. Or the blood test. If you refuse those, then you can lose your license for a year.
Got it. So again, you could refuse the test on the street. If you do get arrested, then basically you have the right of blood or breath. But if you do refuse either of those at the jail, then you'll lose your license for a year, which is more of a civil situation, right?
Right, civil.
And not criminal, which is the DUI charge. Most people don't understand that, right? It's civil and criminal.
Two separate things, right?
Got it.
Yep.
Okay, so when you go to the jail, if you get stopped by the police, you get arrested for DUI, should you do the breath test or blood test? You don't want to lose your license for a year. Most likely you probably had 2-3 drinks. Maybe you are over the 0.08. Should I do breath? Should I do blood? What helps me? I don't want to say beat it, but what's better for my rights? What's better for me and my family? If I make a mistake and I'm in that situation and now I got to make a decision, blood or breath?
I've been asked that 100 times, right? And I don't, to me, maybe other lawyers have different opinions, but to me, it really doesn't make a difference in regard to the case itself. Because let's pretend I had a drink of alcohol right now. If I were to blow into a breath test 5 minutes from now, then ideally you would not want to take a breath test. If I was forced to blow into a breath test 5 minutes from the time that I started drinking or 10 minutes, you would want to choose a blood test because you're going to have alcohol, you're going to have what's called mouth alcohol that's going to affect the test, right? But the police officers, in order to get the actual breath test results into a case, into the trial, they have to do what's called an observation period of at least 15 minutes. And so if they do the observation period for at least 15 minutes, the studies show that there should be no residual mouth alcohol left in the mouth to affect the results of the test. And so at that point, it doesn't matter. It's more, if you do a breath test, you're going to lose. The difference really is if you do a breath test, you're going to get the results immediately. And if you get the results immediately, then they're going to take away your driver's license immediately. If you do a blood test, you might not get your license taken away for 2, 3, 4 months down the road because the blood test results take that long to come back. And so,
I'm laughing because when I was a cop in Henderson, DUIs in New York City were different. Like you would have to call highway patrol and they would do a DUI. But in Henderson, the 15 minutes, you have to watch the guy. So you just arrested this guy. He's like sitting there with handcuffs. And they got to watch the guy because you make sure he doesn't burp or do something.
Yeah.
So you're like staring at this guy. You're like a cop in uniform. And you're staring at this guy for 15 minutes to make sure he doesn't play around with his mouth or tongue or burping, whatever.
Right.
I never understood the whole logistics of it. But I would watch the guy for 15 minutes. It's kind of an awkward situation. You just arrested this guy and you're like, hold on one second. I can watch you for 15 minutes. And you're staring at the guy. You're not supposed to look away because they could ask you, did you look away? Maybe he burped or something. So it's like the most awkward situation. Like I'm in love with this guy, but he's looking at him for 15 minutes. It was an awkward situation. One thing that we've had different conversations, I'll bring up a few things to you and you tell me what your thoughts are. So in my eyes, if you're going to go to court and fight it, if you do blood, the nurse has to show up to testify. So if the nurse doesn't show up, that's going to help your situation, right? I also, as a police officer, you would get 2 vials of blood and you have to make sure there's this white anticoagulant and there's a box and so on. And then you got to take the vials and write your name. So there was one arrest that I had where it was, that I was involved in, where there was twin brothers and the officer wrote the wrong name on the blood vials. Mm-hmm. It was the twin brother, but he wasn't the driver and whatever, and the case got dismissed. So the chain of custody of the blood going to this evidence refrigerator locker, at the jail, the chain of custody of the evidence and so on, because it's blood, right? So I always thought that was interesting for if someone does blood. Now, if it's breath, I always think the machine has to be certified. There's a toxicalizer calibration, and also the cop has to be certified. His certification, he carries a little card to be expired. I remember it's expiring. I have to go for training. I don't know if criminal defense attorneys are so big like to check on their training because it expires like every year. You have to go for this intoxilizer, retraining certification. So I always laugh because there's different ways, because if the nurse retires and she's in the Philippines, she's not going to come back to testify.
Yeah.
So it just depends upon the situation, or the breath machine. Sometimes the machine's not calibrated or not working. And there's so I think there's different ways, I guess, for a criminal defense attorney by looking at these little things in general. But I always,
it's rare though.
But most cops would tell people, they would say, look, if you do blood, you're going to keep your license. But I always felt that was kind of wrong, even though, yes, I'm educating them. I'm also trying to get more evidence that way, because with the blood, right, you can check for drugs, where breath, you're just checking for breath. And normally they have to check off the form, right? But
if there's,
I'm getting now the government has your blood, and I think they could do more of an extensive search with blood than with breath, right?
Well, they can, but they also have to have reasonable suspicion to search for the drugs, in your blood. So when they take your blood, they don't just search every single thing. You
check off the box.
Yeah. It just, if the investigation was based all upon DUI and all of a sudden, they're checking for drugs and things like that, then there's no basis to do that.
I just think most people, if an officer tells you, hey, if you do blood, we don't know the results, and 6 months from now you get something and you can still drive. Right. In some regards, I think that the problem with that is that in some regards, for the people, for the community, for the citizens, in some regards, you want the results to come back quicker. If you're the people, you want them to come back results quicker, because you don't want them to be on the roadway, right? Because if it comes back over 0.08, then they're not allowed to drive after, 7 or 10 days.
7 days.
They have to set up a Dmv hearing in general. So it's just kind of interesting, because, like I said, I think a lot of officers will tell people their rights, like if you do the blood test in general. So I think what it comes down to is, I guess it's a judgment call. So if you had to go by a percentage, blood or breath, I mean, what do you feel? What does your stomach say from being? I would say
I mean, if a family member asks me, what to take, I'd say take the blood test.
Take the blood test. Okay.
That's what I would say.
Okay. So that's good to know. I think that's a major question people always ask, right? What do you do with the blood or breath? All right. Next question is, what should I do if someone makes a false allegation and they want to basically say, hey, if you give me $1,000, I won't go to the police. And I've heard things happen like, people make these sexual assault allegations like, hey, what you did to me last night was wrong. You raped me or you did something. And I know in Vegas there's a lot of scams with different people. You meet some people and they're like, hey, what you did to me last night, I'm going to go to the police. You know what? If you just give me $1,000, I'll forget about it. So kind of like a trick or something like that in general. But sometimes you hear people that, or you hear like a family member calling and say, look, if you give me $5,000, what are your thoughts? Those are weird situations, weird conversations about that. Because the truth is, you may not know if something did happen or didn't happen. Or some people may say, hey, what happened last night was not consensual. I didn't say yes, and you raped me. And if you want to just give me some money, I won't tell the police. Kind of.
Well, are you saying that the police?
Basically, what they're saying is, I won't go to the police if you give me some money. Because I'm sure you've heard these stories.
That's great
right?
evidence. I mean, that's great. That's great evidence.
If you get a text message,
you want it to be in writing, right? Through social media, through text message, something like that. You would, as the person who didn't do anything wrong and is being extorted, then you want to catch that in writing for sure. Because let's pretend that she does go to the police. Now you have some great evidence for your criminal defense lawyer to show the prosecutor about the reason why this woman is doing what she's doing, and which would make a very strong case for you.
To help protect you, to show that this person was really doing it for money.
Really doing it for money, right? I've had many cases, at least a handful of sexual assault cases where there has been a motive, right, from the person who is alleged to have been sexually assaulted. And sometimes that motive is beyond money. Sometimes it's a custody battle that's going on, and they need to put the husband in a position to make them look bad, right? Secondly, it could be for immigration purposes. I've seen that as well, where the alleged victim needs to get her papers, and she's using the fact that she was a victim of a crime to try to become a citizen, right? Which there is a clause that in the immigration rules, in the citizenship rules rather, that allows that to be considered. So there are scenarios where people do that, make the false allegations in order for some type of motive, whether it's monetary or whether it's something else.
We're going to jump back to some other questions. The other ones that I had were about DUI and marijuana and stuff like that. But just to go through the other questions, what should you do if the police ring the doorbell and they want to question you? So basically, just you all of a sudden there's a cop in front of your door, rings the doorbell, and you're like, oh, the cop's there. Like, should I answer my door? Do I not answer my door? I have no clue why. But just what are your thoughts? Police officer in uniform at your door. Now, God forbid it's not for, here we're talking about more criminal defense. It could be that someone passed away, or a car accident, right? Someone's coming to, notify you. Normally, most police officers will basically leave a business card in the door. But what's it take? Do I have to open my door?
You don't have to open the door. No, you don't. You have no right to open the door. And you're right. If they want to get a hold of you, or they want you to get a hold of them, they'll leave their business card. In fact, I would say don't open the door. Wait for the officer to leave. If they're not leaving, get on the phone and call your attorney as soon as possible and ask them about what's going on. Why are the police at their door? And then let that attorney guide them through the situation. After the officer leaves, again, call your defense attorney and have them guide you through the situation as to what they should do. Should they call the officer back? Should they not call the officer back? Should they have the lawyer call the officer back? That's what I would recommend.
And again, it doesn't make you look bad whether or not you're just not answering the door. You have that right. And if you're unsure or you're nervous, and these days people are more nervous with police in general. So, there's no reason. They'll leave a business card and you can either call later, or you could have a criminal defense basically attorney call as well to find out what's going on.
Yeah, that's probably the right answer. I mean, I've had many people come to me with that same situation, right? A cop has left a business card at the door. Cop has talked to them at the door or talked to them somewhere, and they come and see me because now they feel that they are being investigated, and they want to know whether they should communicate with the police or whether they should just have me do it. And 99% of the time they want the criminal defense lawyer to do it, and that's exactly what I suggest. And those are the people that are making the right decisions in regard to how to handle their investigation.
So when a police officer, if he leaves a business card in the door, says, "Please call me," you call them up, say, "Hey, how you doing? I got your business card." And the officer says, "You know what? It's not really a big deal. There was an accident or hit and run, or someone made an allegation, whatever it may be. Do you mind if you come down to the office to the police station? Just want to meet with you, just real talk to. I need to close out this case. Just wanted to get your side of the story. Can you meet me today at 5:00? Yeah. What's your thoughts? Should they be going by themselves? Should they call an attorney? What should
Absolutely not. I mean, we go back to the fact that they should call an attorney before they do anything like that. That could be a setup of some sort. Not to say that it is, but you've got to. You're not going to take that chance, right? It's unnecessary to take that type of chance when you have the ability to contact a lawyer, and for a lawyer to go with you if that's what the lawyer believes you should do, or to not go at all. Okay. And just have the lawyer reach out to the officer and see what's going on.
The bottom line is you have that right to basically protect yourself. If you don't know what's going on specifically, you can have an attorney like yourself call them and speak with them on your behalf. You could be the spokesperson. It could be nothing, right? It could be absolutely
nothing. Many times. I've done it many, many times. And sometimes it is something, and sometimes it's nothing.
Okay. What about a simple, what's your thoughts in regards to traffic tickets? Like, there's probably, I wouldn't know how many 1,000 tickets a day, in Las Vegas, Henderson, and North Las Vegas that'd be given out. Even for a traffic ticket, some people say, I see on social media, they'll say, you can just handle the traffic ticket yourself. You can go online, you can pay. I mean, a lot of people get confused. Sometimes they have points, they have to do traffic school. Do I really need a criminal defense attorney to basically handle a traffic ticket? Some people think that it's not a big deal in general, that you don't need an attorney and you could just do it yourself. So the question is, do you need a criminal defense attorney to handle a traffic ticket, whether it's for speeding and so on, and why do I need an attorney?
Well, for most courts, there's some courts that you may not, only out of convenience would you need one, but the majority of the courts here in Las Vegas, like the big ones, like the Las Vegas Justice Court, you want to have a criminal defense lawyer for a traffic ticket, because what they're going to do is they're going to most likely get it reduced down to an illegal parking ticket. They may be able to get the fine reduced or have the fine stay the same and not go up, and prevent that person's insurance from going up. Like I said, keep the points off their record, and in turn, keep their points off the DMV record, right? And it's so crucial to some people, depending on what their profession is, whether they're a valet driver, whether they're a CDL commercial driver, where 1 point on your record can mess up your entire career. It can prevent you from getting a job at one of these wonderful casinos as a valet driver. And so it's very, very important, and I don't think you want to take that risk of going down there and trying to handle it yourself, and having to, maybe stuck doing 6 hours of traffic school when you didn't have to do so.
I mean, the bottom line is, if you're not educated or you're not an attorney, why not hire an attorney, even if it's a small minimal fee to represent you in court correctly,
right.
You know what I'm saying? Because you can't, of course, you more money if your insurance goes up. Of course, you have money if there's traffic is school. So why not have an attorney basically handle it on your behalf? I would say the biggest thing is just learn from it. And if you're speeding, just slow down. Or if it's registration insurance, just try to make sure you're on top of your game with, keeping the registration insurance going, so you don't get those tickets in the future.
And it's time. Time is money, and so
you might as well work, make money.
You're losing money if you are trying to handle this stuff on your own when you technically don't have to. Got it.
Jumping back to DUI, Dmv hearing. For a Dmv hearing, which you mentioned earlier, but for DUI, is this something that you can win the hearing? Is this something that you could lose? Do I really need a criminal defense attorney? Some people think they could do it on their own. In regards to the civil hearing for a DUI.
Right. DMV hearings are important. They're very important, but going back to what we talked about earlier, there's two parts to a DUI. There's the criminal side, which is the criminal charge of the DUI itself, and then there's the DMV side, which is more of the civil arena. So the standard of proof is different. They don't have to show beyond a reasonable doubt that you were impaired while driving or an actual physical control of a motor vehicle. Are they very difficult to win? Yes, they are. I mean, we probably only win about 1 out of 10 DMV hearings is what I tell my client. But what it does, and a lot of people request a DMV hearing, they take the chance because they want to take the chance. They want to exercise every tool in their toolbox to try to prevent their license from being suspended. And if it gets suspended, it could be for 90 days. If they refuse the breath or blood test, it would be for an additional year as well. So it's a big deal. And a lot of the ones that we win, typically, which I would say is probably 4 out of 10, are the refusal ones, which are the big ones, which is the year suspension. Those ones that we've had more success in defending those and winning those, which I feel very proud about for me and my team at the office.
How do you win more of those? Is it more for like if there's a translation problem, language, or
well, the officer has to specifically, the officer has to specifically let the person know that they have the right to refuse, and more importantly, what the consequences of the refusal are. So if you do not do this, sir, you are going to lose your license for a year. Do you still want to refuse? Right? And so I'm giving you the brief version now. They have a specific way that they have to say it, but they have to be educated of the consequences of what their refusal is going to cost them, right? So to go back to your question, is it important to hire a lawyer for a DMV hearing? Absolutely. Why do people do it if the win rate is so low? It's because it also buys them more time to drive. So, for example, if I got a letter in the mail next week that says, we got the results back of your blood test, your license is going to be suspended on this date and time. If they bring that letter to me, I can request a DMV hearing and get them what's called a temporary license, and now they can continue to drive for the next 2, 3, 4 months before that DMV hearing even takes place. And so they have bought themselves more time to continue to drive, and people like to kind of put off the revocation. I thought about saying the word inevitable, but I still like to believe that we can possibly win the case. But put off their time of their life where they might not be able to drive. But again, even if you did lose a DMV hearing, you can still drive. So there really is never a period that you can't drive as long as you get a breath interlock device installed in your vehicle. And there will be no amount of period of time where you cannot drive at all.
That's a new law of the last year, right?
Yeah, a couple years ago that law passed.
Okay, good. So basically the bottom line is that you definitely need a skilled criminal defense attorney to handle the DMV hearing. Every case can be a little bit different. Everyone's life is a little bit different, right? Like if you're going out of the country, maybe it's not a big deal to lose your license for 90 days or something, But you can get the interlock device, which is helpful as well. If someone has to drive for work and stuff, and people's lives change. Like it's probably a good time when people had COVID and they weren't working and they were home, so maybe
they didn't care.
They didn't care for the 90 days. But definitely fighting it is important. Okay, so if I get arrested for a minor offense and they state to stay out of trouble, so basically get arrested for, you represent them, do I really need to be that careful? Like what happens if I get arrested for another small offense like a DUI, domestic battery? And I believe we would call it a stipulation that you have to stay out of trouble.
Yeah.
Is it such a big deal like if I get arrested again?
Oh, it's a huge deal.
Like what? Why is it such a deal?
It's such a big deal because it depends on the negotiation of your case, right? So let's say you have a case where there's a negotiation that you're supposed to stay out of trouble, and the majority of the time, what comes along with that plea negotiation is that there's a suspended jail sentence hanging over your head. So yeah, we're going to give you this deal as long as you stay out of trouble, as long as you maybe pay a fine or take a class. And now you've got 30 days jail hanging over your head, because if you don't do this stuff, then that hammer is going to come down on you. And so if somebody picks up a DUI, which I don't consider a small offense, or a DV battery a small offense, then it's very
So
possible.
even like a petty larceny, or
That would be considered a smaller offense, right? But people always ask me, well, what if I get a traffic ticket, right? No, that's not going to violate the stay out of trouble provision unless it's a big traffic ticket, like a reckless driving or an aggressive driving or something like that. Then now you're in the realm of violating the stay out of trouble provision. But it's a big deal because it can put you in jail because of that suspended sentence that's hanging over your head.
I guess the biggest thing is that all the hard work that you basically do in court, when you make a deal and you negotiate back and forth, right? Then someone messes up, no one's perfect, gets into another situation. Now you got to go back to court and fight the whole suspended jail sentence, right? So you do all this hard work to negotiate a good deal for somebody, for a client not to go to jail for the first offense, and then now they get into trouble, and then they could wind up going possibly to jail for, I always say the deal with the devil. Basically, you're saying 60 days in jail if I stay out of trouble, and then you wind up getting into trouble again. You wind up doing the 60 days.
Well, another thing that you mentioned is it's not more. It's more than that. Sometimes a lot of the times,
months,
rather,
right?
you'll get a deal that allows the case to be dismissed at the end, right? As long as you stay out of trouble. And so if you don't stay out of trouble, not only do you have the jail hanging over your head, but now you also have put yourself in a position to be convicted, let's say, of battery. Let's say if you were to complete this class and pay a fine, the case was going to get dismissed, right? If you violated the stay out of trouble provision, now you could lose the deal. The case doesn't get dismissed. You get convicted of a battery, and then you end up going to jail. So you've really got to stay out of trouble. You really got to do everything you can to be on your best behavior when you have a pending criminal case.
So the problem is the case can get dismissed, which means for some people who don't understand that it's on your record. They call it scope record. So if it's dismissed, you could seal your record immediately, right? So then if you get convicted now, you may have to wait a year or 7 years, right?
Yeah. Huge.
So it's important to really stay out of trouble. I always say to people that it's more of a sensitive time in your life. You need to be careful who you hang out with and so on, because you don't want that conviction, especially if you're going to get a dismissal part of the deal with all the hard work that you're basically doing with you and your team of the defenders. So I think
we don't like that as a lawyer. We don't like that.
You probably feel funny going back, right, with the same client.
Yeah, we don't. We want our clients to abide by the rules.
Okay, so is there a new test? I know that the last time you were on the Problem Solver show, basically we talked about a new test for officers to use with marijuana. Is there any update with that? Is there any type of testing that the officers can use in the future? I don't even know.
I haven't
how
seen
that
it
would work.
yet. I'm still doing DUIs every week. I haven't seen one where.
I don't even know how that would be, because technically it would have to be from your breath.
It's breath. It's some sort of I know California was doing it, some sort of breath test for marijuana, right, to see the active THC levels in your breath. But I just had a marijuana DUI today, and still have not seen it. All the marijuana DUIs that I've seen have all been tested through blood. I haven't seen this new machine put in use here in Las Vegas. Maybe it is, but hasn't come across my desk yet.
I want to do some research on that just to see. It'd be interesting. So what a person who always smokes marijuana, I'm sure you have people that come into your office that say, hey, I always smoke marijuana to relax, or I have pain, and it's always in my blood. It's probably, there's always live THC that you need, right? The nanograms, and to be convicted, like, it's always in my blood because I smoke, and you're allowed to smoke. It's legal. Can I still drive my car? What do you tell someone that basically is always either, whether it's medical marijuana or recreational, and they want to drive their car? What do you say to these people?
It's just like alcohol. It's, even though marijuana is legal, so is alcohol, and you can't drive while impaired. Now the rub is that the people that have been prescribed this, right, and they need it for medicinal purposes, but there's also other drugs like Xanax or something, for example, where if you are impaired, you can't drive, even though you have been prescribed that particular drug. So it's a tough one, right? It really is tricky. I always tell people that the active marijuana can stay in your blood 3 to 5 hours, right? So if you're smoking marijuana, you got to wait it out. You got to wait it out for at least 3, 4, 5 hours before you get behind the wheel of the vehicle, so that active THC can get out of your system. And that's really all you can say. You can't say that
because everyone's different, right? Their body weight, their blood.
So that's why I give a range, right? And this is more of a scientific field, right? The forensic scientists are going to debate upon, the dissipation of marijuana, how fast it goes through the blood system, metabolizes through the blood system for each particular individual, their size, their weight, their use, their all those things. The tolerance, yeah.
It's interesting. So when people would ask me, I would say sometimes I always think 6 to 8 hours is like a really good number. Well, the problem is if it's midnight and you're smoking or drinking alcohol, it's not till 6 in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning, and people are going out, right, and smoking and drinking these days in Las Vegas and all throughout the United States, places that are legal. But it's waiting a good amount of time. If you smoke at midnight, you got to wait till at least 6 a.m. to really probably feel.
Well, then you better go to sleep, and then you should be fine in the morning.
So what's your take on this? Because normally, and when I was a cop, it wasn't legal. It wasn't, for now that it's recreational. Normally, when an officer smells someone of marijuana, to them, it would lead to probable cause. But now, basically, that it's legal, right? It can technically still lead to probable cause, but then you have to find out when they smoked last.
Right.
So if the officer asked them, hey, when did you smoke last? The guy smoked 30 minutes ago. I guess now it's more of a confirmed probable cause because they smoked recently.
Absolutely.
If they say smoked 12 hours ago, then maybe it's different. I don't know how the officers are thinking right now. I mean, I haven't been through training in a long time.
Still probable cause, though. I mean, just that's the problem. Right? Yeah, the smell.
People sometimes they go to their car to smoke marijuana because they don't want it in their home or they have children.
Right.
So they go to their car to smoke, and then they're driving around. The cops just roll down your window, and the whole car smells like marijuana.
That's enough for them to do a whole full-blown DUI investigation, and it's enough for them to search the vehicle
because they could think that you're basically trafficking marijuana.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful no matter what. I mean, everyone's different.
Yeah.
But I just think, my situation, I'm not smoking marijuana, so my car's not going to smell like it. But to each his own. Everyone's different. But you got to be careful. You're going to get stopped by the police, and if you're behind the Best Buy at 3 o'clock in the morning and they're checking your welfare and the whole car smells like marijuana.
Now the whole welfare check has turned into an investigation.
Correct.
Yeah.
So we need to be careful. Is it really a big deal to drive on a suspended driver's license? What can basically happen to you as well? I guess suspended license could be whether it's tickets, you didn't pay something, whether you have a DUI, suspended license. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, those are two different things, right? If you're driving on a suspended or revoked license because of a DUI, it's a huge deal, because the penalty is 30 days in jail or typically 60 days of house arrest, okay? And so that's a harsh penalty. You don't want to drive on a revoked or suspended license for a DUI. You don't want to drive while having a revoked or suspended license, period, but the penalty is much worse if you're doing it while you're
DUI revocation
exactly,
period.
While you're in that period. Is it a big deal to do it when you're not in the DUI revocation period? Sure. I mean, it's a bigger
better time
ticket. Yeah. I mean, but it's not as severe. Now you're in the realm of a simple traffic ticket. You're not looking to go to jail. Most cops, 99% of the cops are not going to take you to jail for driving on a suspended or revoked license. They're probably going to give you a citation that causes you to go to court. But it's important to hire a lawyer for those citations, because if you get convicted of driving on a suspended or revoked license, then your license is going to be revoked or suspended for an additional 6 months. And so the key with that is to try to get it reduced to driving without a valid license, as if you just kind of left it at home or something like that. And
also, depending on what officer, right, they could tow your car. They could tell you, to drive home, to someone to pick you up or take a cab, or someone can give you a ticket. Or right these days, especially, I will share that because officers are on camera all the time now. Mm-hmm. I think discretion has changed. I mean, back in the day, if you felt bad for someone, you could say, "Hey, park your car over here," give them a ticket, and don't drive the car. Mm-hmm. But meanwhile, an hour later, I come back and the car is gone, whether they did it or someone else, right? But Nevada Highway Patrol, I believe, especially on the highway, they're definitely going to tow the car. So it depends where you are, probably what region in the state as well, and what officer is pulling you over at the time, and how bad of a situation. Maybe if you have a long scope record of driving suspended several times, right. The totality of the circumstances as well. We basically have 4 questions left, and then we're going to basically wrap up. Is there really such a thing as good cop and bad cop? What does that exactly mean? We watch movies and stuff like that, but what does it mean in your eyes as a criminal defense attorney when you say a good cop and bad cop?
Well, it is just like the movies, but maybe on a lower drama level, and that usually comes into play in regard to investigation. But it's not always in the little room where the guy comes in and one person's watching him behind the glass, and one guy's questioning him, and then he says, "Well, all right, I'm going to come in and I'm going to try a different approach now." It's not always that. It could be in the field, meaning at the scene of the investigation where one cop talks to the guy, he's not getting results, and so the other cop maybe uses a softer approach, or maybe they bring in a female to use a different approach, and it does work. I'm telling you, I've seen many interviews that were recorded and audio and video, and I've seen the approach done many times. It is a real thing. They alternate the officers. If one of them's not getting the job done, they'll bring in a different one to try a different approach. So it's real, but never seen the cop slamming his hand on the table or throwing the guy against the wall or punching the wall or doing something like that like you see in the movies.
When does somebody really need a criminal defense lawyer? Like when, to some people it's different. Some people say you don't need a criminal defense attorney for that. When do you think that you need a criminal defense attorney?
Anytime you feel like you're being investigated. Got it. Anytime.
So anytime it's allegation, if you feel in your stomach that, hey, something's not going to go right.
Yeah. If you feel the cop is questioning you wrong and you feel like, well, hold on a second. Are you investigating me about something, or is the finger being pointed at me about something? And a lot of these times, I'll give you an example. Maybe it would say a child abuse case, right, where you have taken your kid to the doctor and the doctor says, "Oh, maybe I think there was some foul play here," and the detective is interviewing you about, "Hey, what happened to your kid," right? And then midway through the interview, they start asking you questions. Well, how long were you with the kid? Where were you at when you were with the kid? Was anybody else around when you were with the kid? And now you're saying to yourself, well, hold on a second. Are you suggesting that I did something to my own kid, right? And so now the investigation has taken a turn, and so at that point, the person you would hope would, shut it down and say, look, I think that you are turning this investigation against me, and I think that I'd like to have my lawyer present from here on out.
Got it. Can cops actually lie to you? Can they use something called a ruse? What exactly is a ruse, and are they allowed to lie to you?
They are, unfortunately. They are allowed to lie to you and say, yeah.
How's that legal? I mean, I know you could use it, but I mean, people say, how can cops lie? They're not supposed to lie.
I know.
But it is limited, the capacity of what they're lying about.
It is. They could say, hey, Danny, we got you on video. We talked to Joey. We talked to Bobby. They all said that you did it. And so, just tell us, what we want to hear. Right. And so they can do that. Unfortunately, it's a strategy that they have been probably taught at the academy, as you know. But there are limits in regard to, how far they push it, so to speak. I
was laughing, thinking when I was at the Galleria Mall, and there was, I don't know who it was, a kid or it was an adult, and somehow, I used to be kind of try to get a little funny to, see if someone would give something up. And I said to somebody, like, if you commit a petty larceny, that in Henderson we're very special. We have a larceny dog. And they would say, what's a larceny dog? Like, it could smell your body, whether or not you actually stole something. So I would get on the radio and make believe that I was like, can I have the larceny dog to this location, Galleria Mall? And the person got really nervous, like, I did it, I stole it, I took it, you don't need the larceny dog here. And like, it was really funny because there's no such thing as a larceny dog, but it was just something being creative. Or I basically had a kid once, he threw it was like a gun, but I said, listen, I'm going to go back to my car, the lie detector test. I'm going to press the button, and while you stand out here, I'm going to see whether or not you're lying. And I would go back to the car and open the door. I'm like, I'm turning on the machine, and I would say, oh, it says you're lying right now. And the guy's like, oh, no, I'm sorry, officer, I didn't mean to, So you're allowed to use like little ruses, which is just kind of funny. So we used to play a little bit, to try to get someone to admit that they basically did something, But of course, you cannot use the lie. Like if you want to get into search someone's home, you can't say that there's a gas leak. Right?
Exactly.
You can't say, look, there's a gas leak, everybody in the house, in order to search, you need a search warrant for that, right? So it is a limited capacity of what an officer could do, as much as I had fun with it a few times.
That's a perfect example, in regard to warrants. No, there's no lying in regard to getting into somebody's house.
All right, last question, and then we'll just mention about your book. What are the top best 3 tips that you can give anyone Here I wrote here that anyone uses drinks or uses recreational drugs, I guess. But let's just say top best 3 tips to give anyone in regards to if they think that they're involved in any type of criminal activity, whether it's domestic violence or DUI, any type of criminal activity, they made a mistake. What are the top 3 tips that you can give somebody, that they think that they're going to be investigated by the police?
Well, if one of my family members were sitting across from me, or my best friend was sitting across from me, the 3 best things, and these are probably obvious and probably common sense, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do it, right? Number 1 is to not talk to the police without consulting with an attorney first. That's number 1. In short, shut up. Second thing is to if you are arrested, to not talk to anybody in the jail about your case, other inmates about your case. And the third thing is to not talk about the case over the phone. I can't tell you how many times, even though the phone says, hey, you're being recorded, that the person talks about their criminal activity over the phone, and those jail phone calls are used against them in the case and can significantly impact our defense of the case.
Got it. So basically, you got to watch your speech, whether you're dealing with the police or in the correctional facility or on the phone. I mean, you got to be careful in general what you're saying, especially these days things are recorded by the police, right? Audio and video. So I think the biggest thing that you're saying is the 3 tips really go back to speech in regards to being careful. And the problem these days, if you're on alcohol or drugs in general, you may not be thinking, all right, I got to be careful about what I'm saying here.
Right.
So, but in general, but those are good 3 tips in general.
I say a bonus one is to be educated. Another tip is just to be educated. You don't have to be a lawyer, just to educate yourself with the generalities of the law, your rights in regards to search warrants and arrest warrants and probable cause, and what does it mean, what's the definition, and reasonable suspicion, and what's the definition, right? And all those types of things. Just have a brief education on what that stuff means. And I also, I said don't talk to inmates, but also don't talk to other people. Don't tell a lot of people about if you're being investigated. Don't start gossiping and talking about your investigation of the police. The more people you tell, loose lips sink ships, they say, right? So you've got to be quiet and just talk to your lawyer and listen to your lawyer.
Got it. Last thing is, I know that you wrote a book. Tell us a little about your book, what it's called, where people can find it.
It's called The Defense Begins. It's a roadmap for the accused and their families. It breaks down the criminal process in the state of Nevada from the beginning to the end. And I start by talking about somebody who hasn't even been charged with a crime, from pre-charges all the way through the trial process to the end of a criminal trial. It has a lot of resources in there as far as important phone numbers go for people who have been charged with a crime. Like, for example, if somebody's on house arrest, how to get a hold of house arrest. If somebody needs to post bail, what bail bondsman to use. There's some bail bondsmen in there that are very good. It's a resource guide, and it's more of an educational guide. It's an easy read. I wrote it in very simple layman terms, and it's a short read. And my goal was to educate people and really to educate their families, because a lot of times I'm representing somebody, but I'm also representing their families at the same time, because very rarely is it just the individual that's being charged with a crime that I have to deal with. I have to deal with their mom or their dad, or their sister, their brother, their cousin, all these other people, and they have many, many questions for me because they've never been through the process. And so the book helps not only the inmate give them peace of mind about what to expect about the process, and it also gives their families peace of mind about what to expect. And I got some flow charts in there as well that break it down for the visual learners on each step of the case and things like that. And so that was my objective. We give it to every single client, every potential client that comes into my office, and then we give it to their family members as well.
Got it. So what we'll do is we're going to list the link for Amazon if people want to purchase the book.
Sure.
They can go online, Amazon. It's called The Defense Begins by Ryan Helmick. And they could purchase the book. And it's just a good book to be educated, right? We talk about education. So I think it's a great book. It's a short read, small little read. So I think it's a great book to get your hands on. I know that in the future we're going to be doing because it's a new book. We'll do a book signing here at the Sticky Paw Studio. So I'm looking forward in the next few months to doing that. And I always enjoy our conversations because of the whole retired cop and criminal defense attorney going back and forth. I mean, I think we could talk about this for hours. I think when we started, we thought you're not going to do the full hour. We could talk about this for another 2 hours. But it's interesting because, like I said, I am a retired cop. You're a criminal defense attorney. And the bottom line is it's always about protecting your rights no matter what. And everyone's in a different situation. So you got to do what you got to do, to protect yourself and your family, whether, if you ever get arrested or false allegations, which happen, quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But again, I appreciate you coming on. Again, Ryan Helmick with the Defenders Law Firm.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for basically coming on the show. Again, I'm Dave Kohlmeier, the Problem Solver. Again, we have a progressive web app, which is the problemsolver.vegas. Everyone has a problem. You can click on the actual app as you see on the screen, but problemsolver.vegas is if you have a problem, you can click on problems and then go to whatever problem you may have. Myself or other problem solvers like Ryan Helmick, who happens to be a criminal defense attorney, can basically give you a call. Other attorneys, probate, family law, any type of real estate agent, mortgage agents, whatever problem you have, I want to basically kind of connect you to the right person in order to help you. If you're there's also different things like food distribution and people that need housing and homeless and so on. I'm also available 24/7. I can be reached at 702-400-7474. Again, 702-400-7474. You can text and call me anytime. I'm available. I appreciate you guys watching and listening. The Problem Solver. Have a safe week, and we'll see you next week.